In just 20 minutes, Nagasaki was transformed from a bustling city into a haunting symbol of devastation, loss, and the urgent need for peace. The world would never be the same after that morning, and the events that unfolded in those first moments would echo through history as a stark warning of the destructive power of nuclear weapons. It was precisely 11:02 a.m. when the bomb detonated above Nagasaki. In an instant, time seemed to freeze for the city's residents. Everyday routines, children heading to school, workers at their jobs, families preparing lunch, were interrupted by a blinding flash and a thunderous roar that shattered the morning calm. The blast destroyed almost everything within a mile of the epicenter. Buildings that had stood for generations were reduced to piles of rubble in seconds. Streets that once bustled with life were now unrecognizable, buried beneath debris and dust. In the first few minutes, a fireball hotter than the surface of the sun flattened buildings, vaporized steel, and incinerated everything in its path. A towering mushroom cloud rose high above the city, visible for miles, casting a dark shadow over Nagasaki and signaling to the world that something unimaginable had occurred. But what happened in the 20 minutes that followed? The immediate destruction was only the beginning. As the dust settled, a new kind of chaos began to unfold, one marked by confusion, fear, and unimaginable suffering. Survivors, dazed and injured, stumbled through the ruins. Many were blinded by the flash, their skin burned and peeling, their ears ringing from the shockwave. Some wandered aimlessly, unable to comprehend what had just happened, while others called out desperately for loved ones who had vanished in the blast. Many were burned, their clothes in tatters, searching for water or loved ones. The intense heat had stripped them of everything but their will to survive. Some clung to each other for comfort while others searched the ruins for any sign of family or friends, their cries echoing through the devastated streets. The heat was so intense that even roof tiles melted, their surfaces warped and fused together. Glass windows had vanished, replaced by jagged shards and piles of ash. The very materials that had built the city were now twisted reminders of the bomb's unimaginable power. Homes, schools, and hospitals were gone, turned to rubble. The silence was eerie, broken only by the distant crackle of fires and the occasional groan of collapsing buildings. Places that had once been filled with laughter and life were now empty shells, haunted by memories of what had been lost. Then came cries for help, mixed with the distant roar of fires starting to spread. The flames, fueled by shattered wood and broken homes, leapt from building to building, making rescue almost impossible. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning flesh and debris. Most first responders had been killed or wounded themselves. Firefighters, police officers, and medical workers who would have rushed to help were now among the injured or missing. The city's emergency services, overwhelmed and decimated, could do little to stem the tide of suffering. Those who could began pulling neighbors from collapsed buildings, sometimes using only their bare hands. Ordinary citizens became heroes, risking their lives to save others, even as aftershocks and fires threatened to bury them alive. In the face of overwhelming destruction, the spirit of community and compassion endured. Makeshift medical stations sprang up in the ruins, where survivors tended to the wounded with whatever supplies they could find. Bandages were torn from clothing, and water was rationed among the injured. Doctors and nurses, many themselves hurt, worked tirelessly to ease the pain of those around them, even as they struggled to comprehend the scale of the disaster. 20 minutes after the bomb, radioactive black rain began to fall. This rain, thick with soot and deadly particles, was a new and terrifying threat. Survivors looked up in confusion as the sky darkened and oily drops began to coat their skin and clothing. It coated survivors and the ruins, bringing more danger. The rain seeped into wounds and soaked into the ground, contaminating everything it touched. For many, it was a silent, invisible killer, one that would haunt them long after the fires had burned out. Many drank from contaminated streams, not knowing the invisible threat they faced. Thirst drove them to scoop water from puddles and broken pipes, unaware that the very thing they needed to survive was now laced with radiation. The effects would not be felt immediately, but the seeds of illness and suffering had been sown. By the time the first rescue teams arrived from outside the city, Nagasaki's landscape was unrecognizable. Roads had vanished, landmarks were gone, and the city's familiar skyline had been erased. The rescuers, many of whom had never seen such destruction, struggled to find survivors amid the chaos. Japanese officials and foreign correspondents who entered the city in the hours and days that followed were stunned by the scale of the devastation. They documented the destruction, took photographs, and listened to the stories of survivors. Accounts that would later shock the world and fuel debates about the ethics of nuclear warfare. In those first 20 minutes, families were separated, lives changed forever, and the true scale of nuclear devastation began to unfold. Children searched for parents, siblings called out for each other, and friends clung together in grief and disbelief. The human cost of the bomb was only beginning to be understood. Amid the chaos, moments of hope and resilience emerged. Religious leaders prayed in the ruins, and survivors lit candles for those they had lost. Even in the darkest hour, the people of Nagasaki found ways to honor the dead and support the living, drawing strength from their shared suffering. Today, Nagasaki stands as a reminder of the cost of war and the importance of peace. The city has rebuilt, but the scars of that day remain etched in its memory. Monuments and memorials honor the victims, and each year people from around the world gather to remember and reflect. Understanding what happened in those first moments helps us remember why history must never repeat itself. The story of Nagasaki is not just a tale of destruction, but a call to cherish peace, to value human life, and to ensure that the horrors of nuclear war are never unleashed again.